Hi everyone. So, do you struggle with accent and sounding like you are from the place or the culture that you would like to be from? Well, I don't really have an answer for that, but I'd like to share an experience with you about my own native language and my native accent, and how ultimately I feel like it's kind of arbitrary, or at least a matter of perfection rather than communication. So, um, a long time ago, I realized, not realized, but I came to the opinion that for me at least, to have an authentic accent didn't really matter too much. English is my native tongue, and I have lived most of my life in Australia. So that that might be reflected in my accent, but a lot of the time it's not for a bunch of reasons. And Perhaps because, I have stayed in a city in Australia for most of my life. So I have learned or I have picked up a very standardized or general Australian accent. I do not have the stereotypical one, what we refer to as the broad accent. Um, just because of how I grew up, I guess. And this is, I think, when people talk about the Australian accent, I think everybody knows that if you come from more suburban areas, you're bound to have a more standardized accent. It just happens across the board with languages. And if you come from more regional communities or more, yeah, places where accents and languages can be preserved better, that's how that happens. And I think sometimes people maybe don't know what Australia is like, or they think that we all speak with a broad accent, and it's just impossible to understand us all the time. So I often feel like sometimes when I meet people, I disappoint them a lot. They go, "Oh, but you don't sound very Australian." One guy, he came up to me and said, "But I can understand what you're saying." And, yeah, well, it's still English. It's still still a very, yeah, it's just a variant of English, and at times, especially in my case, it's quite a standard variant of English. The other thing is, I'm not around many Australians anymore. Um, and what does this mean? It For me, it means that I often try and tone down my accent or subdue it, because it just helps. People sometimes aren't always used to, for example, um, us the way we pronounce T or R or at the end of words. For example, water. Another one is the W. In Australian English, we say words like towel, owl, and sometimes people are just like, I cannot understand what he's saying. So, you know, I have just gotten used to saying words in a more recognizable format. Towel, water, water. And then of course there's the fact that American and even British media is so strong online and on the TV. So it's just this is what I consume. So that's you know subconsciously a little bit of that will come through. So what does this matter, or how does this relate to language learning? The point that I'm trying to make is my own accent, the one that I consider native. A lot of the time, people do not think it is what they want it to be, and this is real. I think this is potentially important in that when we think about accent, it goes both ways. People might say, "Oh, you have such a great accent in French," but you might, after having trained so hard, um, you would be very a lot harder to satisfy, in terms of you might be holding yourself to a much greater standard when it comes to how well you speak with a specific accent, whereas other people will just be satisfied that speaks just like a local guy, like a native guy. And sometimes it isn't necessarily about sounding exactly like a guy or gal or person on a tape, but just sounding, um, giving off the impression or making people feel comfortable enough with your accent or with the way you speak that they don't need to process anything extra mentally. And if you get to that point, people will be comfortable enough listening to you that, even if you don't consider your accent perfect, they're okay with it. Likewise, me, I think I don't really care what my accent is actually. I have an accent, I guess. But a lot of people don't feel that it's enough. And I notice this is probably the case for people who have learned English and maybe have watched videos of crazy, very broad Australian accents being spoken. And then to hear me speak is kind of maybe a bit of a disappointment. And they will say, well, you don't sound Australian. And honestly, people who have learnt English, I mean, I don't really know if they're the best person to say it, to pass that judgment. However, when I was in the UK on holiday with people who have grown up in the English speaking world natively, it was very easy for them to spot where my accent was from. To the point where where was it? We went along the River Thames. There's the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and there probably still is, like a kind of a street performer. He's a poet or a writer, and you give him some prompts, you give him some money, and he'll write up something for you on the spot. And I did that. It was really cool. And in one specific line, he referenced Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, and I was like, oh wow, it's like speaking to me. So afterwards, I said, hey, this is great. How did you, like, thanks so much, because I'm from Australia, so thank you for putting this in. And he goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. When you were talking to me and giving me the prompts, I heard your accent and I thought, yeah, this guy is definitely from, not to say one of the colonies, but one of those areas, Antipodean accent or something like that, or an accent of a area that, had a former English colonial history. So it was strange because only in England um, was my accent clear enough or perhaps different enough from the standard in that area that people were able to pick up on it straight away. So again, what and how does this relate back to language learning? I don't know. I personally, in my own experience, at least with my native tongue, how your accent is perceived by others is also perhaps something that we should think about and is quite, important in the sense that, people are making up assumptions based on their own study, their own training, their own experiences about your accent. You know, so like I know that I am from Australia, and that's the culture that I grew up in. So like it's so strange to hear other people telling me that I don't have one or something like that. And I understand that I have a very not a strong one, not a prominent one, but it's completely based on a stereotype or an image or sound that they have in their own mind, which they then view my way of speaking in. And perhaps this is something that you have encountered as well. So, what do we take away from this video? I mean, in my opinion, perhaps accents, as I said at the very beginning, are like a matter of perfection of the language or of the skill. And so I think it happens very much in the latter stages of the language journey. And if we just think about it like that, we just worry about communicating your ideas across, you know. And I think the rest will come. Don't worry. Don't fret too much about the accent. It's a matter of perfection rather than a matter of communication. Um, yeah. So that's all I've got for you right now. I did not intend for this to be a long video, but it ends up it is anyway. So anyway, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.